but I'm sort of, I don't know. Are you introduced? Here they go.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, everyone. If you're here for the storytelling, thank you very much. If this is catching you by surprise, please stay. We're going to bar the door so that we can get out. I'm going to go ahead and then just start, but please, stand up as you need to, walk around, keep buying wine, make them happy back there, and let's get started this program. So, this is actually true. A little while ago, I was asked a while back, like, what got me into trying to do this kind of story stuff? And well, I guess like most things, it was high school. Right? When I joined the speech team, and in speech team, this is where we competed with teams from other schools performing written, published works, like a reader's theater style. My events were prose reading and poetry reading, and I was also in chess club and in marching band, so you can tell I had a raging social life. Now this would have been, I guess, about 1975. And I've got a friend, Hunter's his name, and whenever I say something, he tells me, that I'm dating myself, which I find like a really weird comment. Because I actually tried that once. And dinner and the movie went fine, but it got really awkward with a goodnight kiss, But anyway, the whole thing here stuck with me, and then I just started telling stories, folk tales, traditional tales, and then kind of making different programs of my own, like this one. About wine, this Through the Grapevine. And, the idea for this came to me a little while back when my wife and I, the red ring right there, we were sitting on the back deck, right? And it was the evening, and then the birds were going around, and we were just quietly having a glass of wine, just listening to the birds. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, she says, "God, I love you so much." I'm pretty smooth, right? And I say, "Is that you? Or is that the wine talking?" And she said, "Oh, it's me talking to the wine." Goodness. Anyway, so that really got me wondering, why wine? Just what is it about this fermented grape juice? The story of wine is intertwined with the story of human civilization. It's been mythologized by nearly every society, written and sung about by poets, philosophers, even physicists. Euripides wrote, "Where there is no wine, there is no love." I think he was kind of romantic for an ancient Greek tragedian. A bottle of wine contains more philosophy than all the books in the world. That was Louis Pasteur. We're going to hear a little bit more about Louis later on. The writer Robert Louis Stevenson just very succinctly wrote, "Wine is bottled poetry." And of course, there's the ubiquitous "In vino veritas." In wine, there is truth. So, what started all this? How did humans, actually begin purposely making wine? Well, let's go back just a little bit to about 6500 BC, to the palace of the legendary King Jamshid, ruler of ancient Persia and reverend for ushering in a 300-year golden age of arts, medicine, and sciences. And it's said that the catalyst for this golden age was a potentially tragic moment that turned into a happy accident. So, the story goes that a woman, a princess perhaps, Guri by name, and a member of the king's more intimate social circle, was in a bad way. She developed these horrible headaches, migraines really, that just lasted for days, leaving her in constant pain. And while the king was not unsympathetic, he'd stopped inviting her over for conversations, which just made her feel worse. She took to sitting alone in her darkened chambers, eyes closed, head in her hands, moaning despondently. Consequently, everyone pretty much steered clear, and she spent all her time alone and in the dark. Now, King Jamshid was very fond of grapes. Weird segue there, but it'll make sense. And he had jars and jars of them, stored up in the royal pantry. So one day, as usual, he called for a jar to have with his lunch. And the servant brought it to the table, opened it up, and then just reared back in shock. Because the contents were foaming, bubbling even, and they had a very strange odor to what we know was natural fermentation. Yeah, but the king thought that they had just gone bad, and spoiled, and he commanded that the jar be labeled as poison and then set aside because the king never knows when a little poison might come in handy. Well, Guli, wallowing in her despair, decided that Providence had provided her with an answer to her agony. And so one night, she snuck to the pot, pried off the lid, wrinkled her princessy nose at the smell, steeled herself, lifted the jar to her lips, and took a big swig, thinking to end her miserable existence. But instead, she fell into a deep, restful sleep and awoke feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, and migraine-free. Well, when the king heard about this, he sent for her. They had a nice, long chat, and he was so impressed by the drink's effects, he commanded his physicians to have the brew tested, and then he decreed that grapes in the capital be used for winemaking, and he started the practice of taking wine daily in moderate quantities as an invigorating, health-giving drink. Yeah. Not sure about the moderate quantities. And it kicked off that golden age of culture and prosperity. And Princess Guli, well, she found herself back in the king's good graces, once again invited into his presence for conversations, cuddles, and of course, a cup of wine. Now, it's all but certain that it was women who discovered wine. As the primary gatherers of food, women, they managed crops, organized larders, leading to these accidental, serendipitous discoveries of wine, all across the ancient Persian Empire. In fact, grapevines were probably the first fruit crop domesticated by humans, transforming what were wild, bitter, separate male and female plants into cultivated hermaphroditic vines, which meant larger, sweeter berries and a lot more grapes per cluster. The earliest physical evidence of pure grape wine production is traced to the country of Georgia around 6000 BC. And an actual winery was discovered in a cave in Armenia, dating back to around 4100 BC, and it featured a wine press, drinking cups, and fermentation vats. These are like these large, egg-shaped terracotta vessels. The wine was poured into them, and then it was buried underground to ferment. Pretty cool. Well, as winemaking expanded, so did distribution. And around 3000 BC, wine came to ancient Egypt through trade with the Canaanites. Now, it did not take long before the Egyptians started producing their own wine. And by all accounts, this was really, really good stuff. And so the ruling classes, well, they conveniently discovered a story about Osiris, the god of agriculture, that he created wine as a drink for the gods, and so naturally on earth it was to be reserved for the royals and the elites. Commoners had to make do with beer. Yeah. Now there were a few exceptions. One, I'm a commoner most of the time. There were a few exceptions. One was for medicinal purposes, and also for certain significant religious observances, such as the festival of drunkenness. Right? Festival of drunkenness. Yeah. So this commemorated the time when alcohol saved humanity. So here's the sitch. Ra, the sun god, creator of all things, ruler of heaven and earth, he had just about had it up to here with people. I mean, sure, they could be cute, amusing on occasion, but lately, their behavior had just really taken a turn for the worse. They were openly defiant, disobedient, demanding, downright whiny. Any parents of 4-year-olds can probably relate. Well, when he heard that some of them were even plotting to overthrow him, that just hit his last nerve. So he got Sekhmet, the goddess of war and vengeance, and he sent her over to, straighten things out. He figured that she could throw a scare into them, and kill a few, to set an example, get all the others to fall into line. So, taking the form of a lion, Sekhmet got to work, taking out the ringleaders first, but she found that she enjoyed the taste of free-range humans so much that she just couldn't stop. She began to devour everyone she saw, threatening to wipe out humankind altogether. Now, this wasn't really Ra's intention, so he tried to get her to stop, but she was too far along into her bloodlust to listen. So he came up with an idea. He had 7,000 jugs of red beer poured into her path. Mistaking it for blood, she lapped it all up, fell into a beer coma for a week or two, and awoke finally as Hathor, a much gentler goddess. Now, the festival itself consisted of drinking wine and beer to excess, dancing to exhaustion, and engaging in sex to the point of passing out. Those Egyptians were something. The next day, the bells would ring for prayer, and everyone would just have to try to rouse themselves and shakily and groggily make their way to the temples, and presumably inspiring the Bangles hit, "Walk like an Egyptian." All right, we'll cut that one out. All right. Now, as far as wine goes, they had some innovations of their own. They standardized the size and shape of amphora, which were like these two-handled clay jars, to make for easier storage and trading. And they introduced labels, stamping the clay seals with the vineyard and the vintage. While time went on, trade expanded in large part to the Phoenicians. With their premier logistical network, their advanced ship technology, and their cutting-edge star navigation, they were pretty much the Amazon of their time. Well, for high-end goods, the ships just zipped all around the Mediterranean, trading purple dye, cedarwood, and Egyptian wine. And right around 1600 BC, they introduced wine to Greece. And the Greeks took to wine like teenagers to TikTok. And they democratized it. They made wine available to all social classes. And this was attributed to Dionysus. Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and extreme partying. Now, he made it his mission to share the gift of wine with all humanity. And his mission started when? As a young, newly minted god. He paid a visit to Onius, king of Calydon, who was famous for his hospitality, and that proved to be a good thing. So the king greeted the god with his full household attendant. Bowing low, he intoned, "The kingdom of Calydon welcomes the great god Dionysus. We are humbled and honored by the gift of your divine presence." One thing about Onius, he knew how to butter the toast. Now, Dionysus, he just replied, "Oh, don't mention it, don't mention it. It pleases me to oh my, well, hello, and who is this ravishing creature?" Well, Onius looks up and he says, "Oh, well, that's my wife, the queen, Althea." Althea, what a beautiful name. Well, Onius glances back and forth between the two of them. Dionysus with obvious lust in his eyes, and Althea giving the look right back, and he does a quick mental calculus. So that night, after the royal feast, he announces that regretfully he'd forgotten that he had to go on a business trip to perform some sacred rites, which would take him out of town for a few days. But Queen Althea had volunteered to serve as hostess, take Dionysus around, and show him all the very best sights. Come on in, come get some wine that helps the stories go
You're not
down
always
better.
fun at all. Nobody's looking at you. No.
He would take Dionysus around, show him all the best sights. He figured that all things considered, it wasn't everyone's best interest to just get out of the way for a bit. Well, when he returned, Dionysus, looking quite mellow and very relaxed, gave Onius a bunch of grapevines in gratitude for his hospitality. He showed him how to cultivate them, and he decreed from then on the elixir would be known as Enos, the Greek word for wine, in honor of the king. And right now to this day, we will use the word enophile to describe a wine connoisseur. Well, interestingly, it was women. Yeah, it's kind of a mashup of Greek and French, enophile. Interestingly, it was women who spread the worship of Dionysus and the culture of wine all throughout Greece. Now, they were called Maenads, or the raving ones. And in the myths, they're cast as frenzied and feral. Driven to divine ecstasy by Dionysus, they cavorted naked through the mountains, called up spouts of wine and honey straight from the earth, had superhuman strength, and tore apart animals and sometimes people with their bare hands. In reality, Maenads were respectable citizens, wives and mothers, and they served as a link between humans and Dionysus in religious celebrations, which admittedly were off the chain. Euphoric, ecstatic, sometimes orgiastic events where women could briefly escape their highly structured domestic lives, dancing and drinking nearly nonstop, celebrating the disruptive divine nature of wine, kind of like Hollywood in the 60s. Also central, and then that joke lands also central to Greek culture was the symposium. Now, in ancient Greek, that actually literally translates to drinking party. But this was an exclusively male, aristocratic social gathering centered on educated conversation about philosophy.
So you guys want to?
Oh, thank you.
Oh, all right, well.
But I appreciate it. Yeah, sure. And it was centered on educated conversation about philosophy, poetry, and politics, along with heavy drinking of diluted wine. Now, at this point, it was considered barbaric to drink full-strength wine. Symposiums formed the basis of democracy. It provided a structure for debate, negotiation, and compromise, which unfortunately doesn't seem to have transferred to a lot of our current legislative bodies, but, you know, maybe some diluted wine would help there too. Well, things went pretty well for about 1,000 years or so, until one day, some new neighbors came knocking around, started making trouble. Italians. And quicker than you can say spanakopita, Rome conquered Greece, 146 BC, in the summer. I'm going to say it was around August 11th. They appropriated everything Greek. Greek culture, Greek religion, Greek wine, and they came up with some innovations of their own, including wooden barrels and rudimentary glass bottles, which made it a lot easier, to haul around for their thirsty soldiers. They even came up with tasting notes. I'm thinking something along the lines of an easy drinking red, light on the tannins, perfect for relaxing with after a long, hard day of sacking and pillaging. And they established nearly all of today's major wine regions: Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, southern Britain, parts of Germany. I'm going to do this one anyway. I think you could say they were really roaming around. Yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah. Well, anyway, what goes around comes around, and the Roman Empire came to its inevitable end, 476 AD. And wine culture could have been lost during the Middle Ages, if not for an unlikely hero who swoops in to save the day in the foreign love, the Catholic Church. Specifically, Benedictine and Cistercian monks. Now, originally this was for liturgical purposes, but over time they really got into making wine for its own sake. Medieval monasteries became research and development labs. They planned out vineyards plot by plot, observing the differences in the taste from one site to another, taking very, very meticulous notes, and pretty much inventing the notion of terroir, the idea that place influences taste, aroma, and character. But they did not stop there. Oh no. These malolactic monks, these friars of fermentation, they refined and perfected the tools and processes of winemaking. They created most of the wine styles that we know today and crafted a reputation for European wines as being the best in the world, and they set the stage for wine production as an economic powerhouse. And at the very top of the wine chain, considered the best of the best of the best, sat the French. The French, yeah. Oh, and you know what? And they knew it too. But they tried not to be too snooty about it. their general attitude, their general view was that the rest of Europe's wines were perfectly adequate for bathing in. So the French industry was booming. They were shipping bottles all over the place, especially to the recently formed United States. That new guy in charge, Jefferson, couldn't get enough of the stuff. Over 20,000 cases through his presidency. But then, in the 1860s, French winemakers were rocked to the core of their baguettes by a horrible problem. So bad that the French emperor reached out to Louis Pasteur, ranking scientist and well-known enophile, for help. Now, of course, they communicated through couriers and formal letters, but I don't know, I like to imagine it like a phone call. So, oh, hello, yeah, Louis? Yeah, it's me, Napoleon. Yeah, no, not that Napoleon, that was my uncle. Yeah, I'm the third one, your emperor? No, that's all right, yeah. I know you intellectual types, head always in the clouds with one experiment or another. In fact, that's why I'm calling. We've got a problem with the wine. Yeah, it's getting all sour and vinegary. It's really messing up our trade and digging a big hole in the budget. Yeah, I was hoping you'd be willing to take a look. What do you think? Well, Louis says, stop. Just stop. You had me at hello. Packs up his microscopes, sets up his lab in his hometown vineyard, and after a number of mon dieus and quite a few mares, a couple of years along, and he's able to say, voila! He identifies a bunch of weird microorganisms, comes up with a way to gently heat the wine to kill the bad bacteria without hurting the wine itself, saving the French wine industry and giving us a little technique we now call pasteurization. So I think that kind of brings us back to this whole idea of wine as being intertwined with civilization. It goes back thousands of years. Wine was a pillar of ancient Greek and Roman culture and a key Christian religious symbol. The Greek Symposium fostered philosophy and literature, and it set the foundations of democracy. Theater actually developed from Dionysian rituals, and maybe even frat parties, but nothing's perfect. You can even say that wine had a hand in spreading literacy. Gutenberg used a wine press to make the first printing press. Wine culture spanned continents as a major player in world trade. And Pasteur's work on wine, well, it proved germ theory, which led to medical clinical medicine, which led to the development of vaccines. Well, if you believe in those things. So, as we move to the modern era, interest in making wine on American soil really starts to ramp up. Now, North America does have indigenous grape wine varieties. Yeah, in fact, the oldest cultivated grapevine in the United States is a Scuppernong vine. It's well over 400 years old, and it's located right over there on Roanoke Island in Mankato. And it still bears fruit today. But it was European wines that the people wanted. And California became the acknowledged hotspot for European-style, American-made wines, really taking off in the 1960s and hitting its stride with the Judgment of Paris in 1976. Has anybody seen the movie Bottle Shock? Yeah, okay, yeah, well, that was commemorated that wine tasting that saw California wines just blow out the French. And if that thing in the 1860s got them upset, this thing really curdled their breed. I mean, talk about your grapes of wrath. Anyway, this put California on the global stage, and it energized the movement for wine production throughout the nation. And North Carolina is well represented, with around 50 wineries in the Yadkin Valley AVA, turning out some very nice and increasingly celebrated vintages. And then there are over 200 wineries across the state, including, believe it or not, Chatham County. Right about 10 minutes down the road, right off of 64, we've got Fireplace Cellars. It's a really good, lovely little winery, growing and producing all of their own wines. And of course, it would be remiss of me, right, not to mention, right here, in the heart of Pittsburgh, offering a place to buy a great bottle of wine and a space for wine fans to meet, talk, drink, and build community. Since 2012, we have what is arguably one of the very best wine venues in the state, Vino Wine Shop. Let's have a round of applause. All right, we're getting really close to the end here, but speaking of selling wine, I've got an Only in America story that I want to share with you. True story. In 1989, a wine merchant, Bill Socklin, he obtained a rare bottle on consignment from a British wine firm of 1787 Chateau Margaux that was once supposedly owned by the aforementioned Thomas Jefferson from his time as an American ambassador in France. Now, normally a bottle like that would be valued at about $35,000, but because of the Jefferson connection, Socklin was valuing it at over $500,000. He was actually asking $519,000 for it. Well, I know. One night, he brought it to the Four Seasons restaurant in Manhattan to a wine tasting there, because he wanted to show it to a group of rich, say the word with me, we know it, edophiles, hoping to make a sale. But apparently, he accidentally bumped it against the serving tray. And then watched in horror as most of the wine dribbled down his leg. About 80% was lost, but Socklin, was able to salvage some of the wine, and he sampled it. His impression was that, it tasted like it still had some wine taste, but not very good. But he received an insurance payment of $225,000, which still remains one of the largest settlements for a single bottle of wine. Now, was it ever really owned by Jefferson?
No.
Was the accident actually accidental? Oh, thank you. I just wanted to show this. I also, I brought a little bucket. I just want to say that some people say that this bucket is an exact replica of Dionysus's spit bucket. And that's well, whatever you want to put in there. I'll leave it here this year if you want to add anything in there, if you'd like anything here today. I appreciate it. But I just want to close. And in closing, I'd like to just circle back to the Stevenson quote. Wine is bottled poetry. I've got a poem I want to share with you that I think describes the very essence of the cultural experience of wine. And at this point, if you have class, if you'd like to just raise it with me.
I'm a commoner.
And the race wherever you got. Wine, wine, that beautiful drink, lightens the heart, makes trouble shrink. A lovely aroma goes great with a meal. So quaff your wine with unbridled zeal. Cheers.
Cheers.
That's it for me. Thank you for your patience and for your fortitude. I appreciate it. I do have a longer program of this. I'm kind of developing these things for groups, for like clubs, organizations, work groups, things, that could be. So if you know anybody or anybody interested, you got one to push about an hour. And thank you.
Last time you did it about double.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sometimes the crow flies going to see parents, and I haven't in a long time. Same neighborhood, somebody lives the street there. Yeah. So you can get there in 10 minutes, right? But you gotta go all the way around and I've only been on house one time, but it did take a while. So how long does it take you to get? Okay, yeah.
For $500.
So you go, you get this. Okay, you don't get back to 15.5 a month. So you're not going to see that's the way I take it. Yeah. There you go. Right. But you're right. I know it's now lives in Briar Chapel. So we went out to see her place, one of the things about those sections in Briar Chapel. And it said about 25 minutes, and I went, you go straight through the woods, how do you get there? Sometimes I'll do that. River Road. River Road.